A liberdade na internet é um tema controverso no mundo inteiro. Os que defendem a regulamentação no Brasil alegam que a rede não pode servir para propagar mensagens racistas, para pirataria ou pedofilia, por exemplo. Outros acham que a liberdade de expressão não pode ser cerceada. Vamos falar hoje sobre o assunto aqui no Cidadania com o Ian McKay, professor de Direito na Universidade de Montreal, no Canadá. Professor, obrigado pela sua vinda aqui em nosso estúdio, na TV Senado. Queria lhe perguntar que tipo de limites devem existir na internet.
If I'm allowed to answer in a circuitous way, I'd like to change the question a bit. I should like to begin by saying, what's the internet doing for us in the good sense? Well, it creates an enormous creative space. And then you could say, well, should there be limits to that space that we ought to observe or indeed impose? And the limits normally are where activities on the internet create undue disadvantages for particular players. Some people trick or cheat in the game. And then you'll have to stop. And you have to stop them in a sense that we've always, the state has always been concerned to maintain public order. But then when you reach such a limit, there are people who are being squeezed. You have to ask yourself, does the internet have its own resources to deal with the problem? And should we give those a first chance?
E no seu julgamento, a internet tem esses recursos para definir esses limites?
In some cases, you will have to judge this case by case. And in some cases, we may have surprises. If you think of eBay, lots of things are sold on eBay. It's a fantastic new service where people can find potential buyers, or somebody who wants to buy something can find potential traders very far from where they are. They don't necessarily know each other. There are opportunities for cheating, and yet eBay has a disciplining force. They keep track of your reputation. They ask all purchasers whether they were satisfied with the deals. So for many problems where we're reaching the limits of liberty on the internet, eBay has developed circuits and methods to deal with the problems that were there.
A gente pode dizer, por exemplo, que as regras do eBay para o comércio eletrônico deveriam ser separadas de outras regras que valessem para crimes cibernéticos, pedofilia, mensagens racistas, ou nós poderíamos utilizar algumas regras do eBay como essas de reputação para averiguar o passado de pessoas que, por exemplo, tenham cometido crime?
What one has to realize is that the incentives on the players in each of these kind of activities are not the same. When you're dealing with traders and people want to buy things, a simple monetary signal or a reputational signal may be enough to keep them in line. Pedophilia is another story. And people who engage in that kind of activity on the net may not be dissuaded by simple sanctions. So we may need heavier artillery. And here we may not be able to do without the heavy hand of the state. Keep order. In cyber hate crimes, this is a more difficult field because to an extent information corrects itself. If you say something silly on the internet, very soon somebody will say, you're an ass. Is that enough to discourage this kind of hate? Literature, you might almost call it. There is a feature of the internet which should make us think about these issues, because on the internet it is easy to find kindred souls who share your preferences. It's one of the peculiar features, and indeed a very exciting feature of internet in many respects. But as far as hate literature is concerned, it's one of the dangerous features.
Nós deveríamos também separar os tipos de crime na internet, por exemplo, os crimes que atingem pessoas, como esses de pedofilia ou de racismo, de crimes contra o patrimônio, como, por exemplo, pirataria ou roubo de senhas, crimes financeiros.
I think we have to analyze each of these phenomena separately. They don't necessarily raise the same questions. Financial crimes are the flip side of that. There are indeed ordinary cheaters. If you steal credit cards, that is ordinary theft of sorts, and we need to deal with it that way. But then people invent new financial instruments, concentrate risks and cause macroeconomic disturbances, are doing a different kind of thing. Here, innovation and too dangerous innovation are side by side. And so if we are too heavy-handed in discouraging what we think is too dangerous, we will also discover the innovative side, and that will hurt us. As far as intellectual property is concerned, this is a more complicated story, because we think that intellectual property stimulates creativity. But how much it stimulates and how long these rights and how strong these rights have to be in order to do that work, we do not very well know. We do know that the cultural industries are very effective lobbyists for getting longer copyright. The cultural industries, to stay just with the audio and visual side of things, we're not talking about patents for a moment, are very effective lobbyists to say we need longer protection. And they manage whole portfolios of which some are very successful items. And so if you get an extra 20 years to milk that cow, this is economically a very important gain, and it's worth a lot of lobbying. But at the same time, we see that on the internet people share lots of information through open content, copyleft, and various formulas, creating share spaces. So we have two contradictory movements within the same population.
É interessante o senhor mencionar isso, porque o que nos parece é que esses que defendem maiores restrições às cópias e uma extensão maior dos direitos de propriedade são justamente grandes corporações que têm muitos recursos financeiros, inclusive, ao passo em que projetos como o Creative Commons, que são pessoas que tentam distribuir os seus produtos e normalmente são os autores daqueles produtos, ainda nem sequer são conhecidos por boa parte da população.
That's a very interesting issue, and in fact this goes back a long way. The answer to this goes back a long way. Let me tell you first up that we have now statistics on the sales of recorded music and films, but music in particular, but also on the total amount of money that consumers spend on music, that is including records and concerts. And you've probably noticed that the price of concerts have gone up. Creative activity in music is now paid more through live performances than through dead performances. And here we go back to the Grateful Dead, which was a rock group, I think, in the US in the 1980s and 90s. And they said, you pay for our live performances. Once it's recorded, it's dead, and you may have it free. This is a different business plan, and the statistics we now have seem to say that you can very well make money that way. And so the piracy problem may in part be a problem of redefining your business plan, being more imaginative about your business plan. I don't say that's the whole answer, but at least it could well be a good part of the answer. Now, to answer the secondary question you had, how is the Creative Commons and the other share formulas going to find its way through all sorts of consumers? Well, if you have groups that say recorded music is dead music, we might as well share it, and consumers hear this and see this, they say, let's do it. And second, new groups that need to get known may well share their music through open content formulas. And this may persuade other creators that this is a viable formula.
Professor, o senhor tem livro que vai ser lançado em breve, Law and Economics for Civil Law Systems, que em português talvez a gente pudesse traduzir como Direito e Economia para Sistemas do Direito Civil. Como é que as ideias desse livro se relacionam com aquilo que a gente tem discutido até agora?
If I may go back a little bit, from the late 1960s on, in the legal world, we developed fantastic computer tools to retrieve law text, and we could thereby find text even though we multiplied the quantity of text that were available. We did not develop at the same time tools that deal with the social side of law. Law is a technical language couched in text which we have to know and be able to retrieve, but law is also a social discipline. It has social effects which we ought to be aware of. For that second aspect, we didn't have equivalent tools that we developed for the first aspect. In the 1970s only, some economists in the United States initially thought, well, we can probably also develop tools for that second aspect. If we borrow tools from economists and consider that legal rules have a good purpose, and we can trace the purposes by looking at how it changes costs and benefits that the citizens face as they are becoming aware of rules. It turned out, as this was applied to common law in the United States and then in the UK and Australia and in English Canada, that this was an extraordinarily powerful way of understanding law. So besides looking at text, you could now also look at social effects. And the juncture of those two is what makes the best lawyers. The point of this book is to say that for civil law countries that have civil codes, this also works, and perhaps even better. And Brazil is a civil law country, civil code. You have a recent civil code, as Quebec does. But all Latin American countries have civil codes. So it's important to say this is a part of your reality. You can use this tool, and here is a way of showing you how you can do this.
E como o senhor relaciona essa interação entre leis e as consequências sociais das leis com a internet?
Well, if you recall, we were talking first about pedophilia, cybercrime, then about eBay and the traders on the internet, then about piracy and the cultural industries. In each case, we said, well, before we define in the abstract the limits, let us look at what the incentives are that play on the actors in that field. Let's see how they can be changed. In some cases, the actors in the field will develop the tools to correct things. In each of these cases, we were wondering not about technical legal rules, we were wondering about social effects of rules. What are the best techniques? If you can trace the effects of rules, you can also trace the effects that different rules might have and choose the most appropriate one for the problem you have. So I think there's the link.
Aqui no Brasil existe um ditado que diz que existem leis que pegam e leis que não pegam. Não sei se o senhor já ouviu isso. Mas como é que a gente pode melhorar essa distância que há muitas vezes entre o processo de elaboração de leis e realmente a preocupação de fazer com que essas leis sejam aplicáveis e bem aplicadas para a sociedade?
This is, of course, the £100,000 question. One thing we need is support from the older generation, and I was very pleased on an earlier visit to Brasilia that one of the judges of your Supreme Court was able to receive me, Judge Mendes, and he has a keen interest in this type of thinking, and he's sensitive to it. So I believe these iconic figures can have a stimulating effect. Then there is a very active Brazilian Association for Law and Economics, and in very lively association, many members. All of those members talk to each other. Lots of books are being published. I might say that a adaptation to Brazilian audience of that book is being prepared in Sao Paulo. And so the upshot of that is that we have to work on the new generation of lawyers so that they have both tools, the text and the social effects, in their fingers.
E qual é o nome dessa associação no Recife?
Associação Brasiliense de Direito e Economia, ABDE.
Qual é o interesse específico deles?
They are interested in all aspects of using economic tools to better understand the law. All aspects, from criminal law to corporate law, property rights, contracts, civil liability, environmental law, administrative law, constitutional law, the economics of federalism.
Quais têm sido as principais ferramentas que os estudantes de direito, estudiosos de direito e advogados têm utilizado no ramo da economia para aprimorar esse entendimento?
If I take that to mean in which fields has law and economics been most successful, now of course we have to go back and then also see what happened in English-speaking countries, common law countries. I suppose the area where it's been most successful is in corporate law. Corporate law in the 1950s and 60s was a dusty area, technical. How do you set up corporations? Until people started to say, but these rules have good economic purposes. If you have limited liability, then you're able to concentrate capital more easily because people can then spread their risk more effectively. And as soon as you looked at all of the rules of corporate law, it suddenly started to make sense. But once you do that, you can also say, can we design different rules? What will their effect be? Will this help the purpose of corporations? We have also had great success, I think, in civil liability law. Tort law to the English speakers, that is a very convincing application. In the legal scholarship of my own province in Quebec, the view was being propagated that law served only to compensate victims. So I said, well, this doesn't make sense. If you do that, then you might as well set up a state fund and pay the victims. Turns out that has been done in New Zealand, and once you do that, people become careless. They create more accidents than they need to. So the state cash, the fund, needed 6% in constant money per year more. So after 15 years, the parliamentarians said, this is unsustainable. So they came back to a system that said, if you are careless, you're going to pay more. But that is the original idea of civil liability. If you are at fault, you're going to pay. But that is a signal to be more careful. And since we look at that law that way, everything makes sense.
Nós agora estamos já caminhando para o final da nossa entrevista, professor, e eu queria lhe perguntar sobre as suas opiniões a respeito da relação entre liberdade na internet e política e eleições. Nós tivemos essas eleições municipais aqui no Brasil e claro que a internet se transformou numa arma poderosa também no mundo político e eleitoral. Como é que o senhor vê a liberdade na internet nessa área da política e eleições?
One of the things the internet does is make you very quickly visible anywhere you do anything. And this is particularly significant for politicians. What the internet will do to the electoral process, I fear, is force politicians to live in easy images. Show up with your family, kiss the babies, express themselves in sound bites, which are not nearly representative of their intelligence. There are very few real debates that go deeply into the issues at stake, in part because the audience that can follow you through the internet and through the media in general simply don't have the time of day to follow you there. So you have to stick to sound bites. Is that good for democracy? Who shall say? Who shall say? I can't say I've been very impressed with the debates that I've seen between the two leading candidates in our southern, amongst our southern neighbours.
Yes, o senhor está se referindo aos Estados Unidos?
Yes. And these are clearly articulate people. In particular, Obama is a very articulate man. And when you see him in debates, he clearly has to cater for people who need to understand sound bites quickly. So as to come up, he's good on his feet, but we'll see if he's elected or not.
E sobre o Canadá?
In Canada, we face the same problem, but I suppose we are a bit more conservative than the Americans. We have, at this point, a conservative federal government that has done well for the economy. We have not, as you have not, suffered from the global crisis, and that's thanks to Harper, who's a good economist, I think. Was any of that predictable from the election debates that we've seen? I doubt it. But fortunately, we are now saddled with a good one. The provincial government in Quebec has just changed, and we now have the separatist party in power again. They have used all sorts of radical formulas during the election, and now that they're in power, but they're a minority government, they want to implement that program, and it doesn't make sense. They can't get it through Parliament to the extent they have to, because they're a minority. So they created formulas that people liked on the internet, on the visibility of the media scale, but in political reality, it can't be implemented. It's going to be too damaging.
No Canadá, o senhor entende que há mais pessoas querendo regular a internet ou em favor da liberdade de expressão na rede?
I suppose our base instinct is to let people do their thing, but we are quite keen on ensuring that there's no hate literature. This is part of our constitutional freedoms, and we're very keen on that. But that's treated as a crime. Pedophilia is a very serious issue, and every month you hear about people being rounded up. So that we take seriously. In other respects, we like internet commerce to develop relatively unfettered to the extent that there are no clear victims. So we like the open space in front of us. As I have a feeling in Brazil, every time I come here, I have this sense of the open spaces in front of us. Let's move.
Professor, muito obrigado, então, por esta entrevista. Nós conversamos com o professor Ian MacKay, professor de Direito na Universidade de Montreal, no Canadá, e agradecemos também a sua participação, aqueles que nos assistiram aqui. Se houver dúvidas ou comentários, acesse nossa página www.senado.leg.br/TV. Até a próxima.